certain nights in your life that permanently alter the way you look at the dark, and the night I spent completely alone inside an isolated cabin at Blackwood Ridge remains at the very top of my spine-chilling memories. I thought I was simply escaping the overwhelming chaos and noise of city life for a quiet weekend getaway to clear my head. The cabin was located roughly 20 miles deep into a massive, dense, and unnaturally quiet forest, far away from any neighbors, cell phone service, or modern civilization. When I first pulled up to the weather-beaten, rotting wooden structure in the late afternoon, the oppressive, dead silence of the woods should have been my first warning sign to turn around and leave. The air was bitterly cold, and thick, low-hanging gray clouds rolled across the sky, blotting out what little sunlight remained. Unlocking the heavy, swollen front door, I was greeted by the heavy, stale scent of dust, damp wood, and long-forgotten isolation. I quickly brought my duffel bag inside, lit a small kerosene lamp, and tried to settle my nerves as the sun completely vanished, plunging the entire forest into absolute pitch-black darkness. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face out there. It was the kind of heavy, suffocating dark that feels alive and watching you. I spent the first few hours trying to read and distract myself from the creepy atmosphere, but around midnight, right when the forest outside reached an absolute, ringing stillness, I heard the very first sound. It wasn't the natural scurry of a woodland animal or the cracking of wind-blown branches against the roof. It was a rhythmic, calculated scraping noise coming directly from the exterior wooden wall, as if someone or something was slowly dragging long, sharp fingernails down the rotting logs of the cabin. My heart instantly hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I froze on the edge of the small cot, barely daring to breathe or even blink. The scratching noise shifted slowly, moving stealthily toward the front porch. Then came a sound that made my blood run ice cold. A soft, unnatural dragging gait across the wooden deck boards, followed by dead silence right outside my bedroom window. Slowly, carefully, I slid off the bed and crept toward the window, pulling back the dusty, moth-eaten curtain just an inch to peer outside. The pale beam of my heavy-duty flashlight caught something standing directly in the center of the porch, and my mind instantly rejected what my eyes were seeing, desperately trying to find a logical explanation where none existed. It was a figure standing well over 7 feet tall, impossibly thin, with elongated, twisted limbs that looked completely disproportionate to its body. It wore no clothing whatsoever, and its skin appeared chalk white, slick, and completely devoid of any hair, pores, or features. Before I could even process the full horror of its form, the creature slowly turned its head at a severe, unnatural 90-degree angle, fixing its blank gaze directly toward the window where I stood hiding. It had no eyes, no nose, and no mouth, just smooth, flawless, terrifyingly blank flesh where a face should have been. Terror completely paralyzed me. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet and crashing hard onto the wooden floorboards. Outside, the scraping resumed instantly, multiplied now by frantic, manic scratching at every single window and the door frame simultaneously. Low, guttural whispers began to echo from the dark porch, voices mimicking human speech, overlapping and twisting into a distorted chorus that begged, in broken fragments of words, to be let inside out of the cold. I spent the remaining hours of that endless, torturous night huddled in the furthest, darkest corner of the room, clutching my flashlight like a weapon, listening to things circle the perimeter of the cabin over and over again until the first faint streak of pale gray light finally pierced the eastern horizon. The moment the sun broke through the trees, the terrifying sound stopped entirely. I didn't wait to pack properly. I grabbed my keys, bolted out the door, and sped down the dirt road without looking back once. Even now, sitting safely miles away in the light of day, I can't shake the haunting, paralyzing feeling that whatever was standing on that porch is still waiting out there in the dark, keeping score.
There are certain nights in your life that permanently alter the way you look at the absolute dark. And the night I foolishly agreed to watch over the abandoned weather observation outpost, nestled deep within the frozen peaks of the northern mountain range, remains an eternal scar etched across my mind. I had taken the job out of desperate financial necessity, needing a quick paycheck to clear mounting family debts, and the isolation seemed like a small price to pay for a quiet week of solitude. The outpost was a heavy, reinforced concrete bunker, built half into the jagged rock face, accessible only via a treacherous, winding gravel track that ended abruptly at the edge of a massive, dead pine forest, where no birds ever sang and no wildlife ever dared to tread. When my old utility truck sputtered to a halt in front of the rusted iron blast doors late that afternoon, a suffocating wave of unnatural dead silence rolled through the valley, heavy and oppressive. But my stubborn exhaustion completely ignored the warning signs screaming inside my head. Stepping out into the biting, freezing air, I noticed the sky above had turned a bruised violet color, choked by thick, low-hanging banks of fog that completely swallowed the fading sunlight. Unlocking the heavy deadbolts of the blast door required all my strength, and as it swung inward with a prolonged, metallic groan, I was instantly struck by the stale, suffocating stench of ozone, damp stone, and forgotten decay. Inside, the control room was bathed in the harsh, flickering green glow of old radar consoles and analog dials that hummed with a low, rhythmic vibration. I dropped my heavy duffel bag onto a rusted metal cot in the corner, lit a single paraffin lamp to supplement the dim overhead bulbs, and tried to steady my racing heartbeat as the sun finally vanished behind the jagged peaks, plunging the entire valley into an absolute pitch-black void. Out there, the darkness wasn't just the absence of light. It felt thick, sentient, and violently alive, pressing against the reinforced glass of the narrow observation slit like an invisible hand. I spent the first few hours trying to distract myself by logging atmospheric pressure metrics and reviewing historical seismic logs, but right around midnight, precisely as the digital clock flipped to 12 o'clock, the ambient hum of the monitoring equipment died instantly, leaving behind a ringing, absolute stillness. That was when the very first sound pierced the cold night air, not the crack of shifting ice or the howl of mountain winds, but a slow, calculated metallic scraping noise coming directly from the thick exterior steel reinforcement plates of the bunker wall, as if an enormous hand with razor-sharp claws was dragging itself upward inch by agonizing inch. My chest tightened into a knot, my breath catching in my throat as I froze beside the metal desk, entirely paralyzed by a sudden, overwhelming wave of pure dread. The scratching sound shifted away from the wall, moving with eerie, deliberate stealth towards the heavy outer blast door, and then came a noise that turned my blood completely to ice. A soft, wet, dragging gait across the concrete steps outside, followed by absolute, deathly silence right outside the heavy steel entryway. Slowly, fighting against the heavy tremors in my legs, I crept across the concrete floor toward the observation slit, pulling back the heavy, oil-stained canvas flap just enough to peer out into the freezing night. The harsh, piercing beam of my high-powered flashlight cut through the fog and illuminated the open concrete landing, revealing a horrifying figure standing motionless in the center, a towering entity well over 8 feet tall, impossibly emaciated, with elongated, multi-jointed limbs that bent and twisted at sickening, unnatural angles. It wore no clothing to shield it from the alpine cold, and its skin possessed a ghastly, chalk-white, translucent sheen that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it, completely devoid of any hair, pores, or distinguishing features. Before my brain could even begin to process the sheer impossibility of its form, the creature slowly rotated its upper torso in a severe, bone-crunching 90-degree angle, fixing its blank, featureless expanse directly toward the observation slit, where I stood trembling. It had no eyes, no nose, and no mouth. Just a smooth, flawless, terrifyingly flat plane of white flesh where a face should have belonged, radiating an aura of absolute malevolence that seeped straight through the glass and into my soul. Terror hijacked my nervous system. I stumbled backward, tripping over a steel stool and crashing hard onto the concrete floor. But the moment I hit the ground, the scratching outside exploded into a deafening, manic frenzy, with hundreds of sharp claws clawing at every single vent, wall, and doorframe simultaneously. Low, guttural whispers began to echo from the dark air shafts, voices horribly mimicking human speech, overlapping and twisting into a distorted chorus that begged in broken, agonizing fragments of words to be let inside out of the freezing cold. I spent the remaining hours of that endless, torturous night huddled in the absolute darkest corner of the control room, clutching my heavy steel flashlight like a fragile weapon, listening in sheer agony as the unseen horrors circled the perimeter of the bunker over and over again, scratching, tapping, and whispering until the very first, faint, sickly gray streak of dawn finally pierced the eastern peaks. The moment the morning sunlight hit the valley floor, the terrifying sounds ceased entirely, leaving behind a ringing vacuum of sound. I didn't waste a single second packing my gear. I grabbed my truck keys, bolted through the blast door, and sped down the winding mountain pass without looking back once, haunted by the permanent, paralyzing certainty that whatever was standing outside that bunker is still waiting out there in the eternal dark, keeping score of every second I have left to live. There are places on this earth where the fog never truly lifts, and the old lighthouse standing at the jagged edge of Blackwood Point is a monument to things that refuse to stay dead. A towering spire of crumbling stone that has weathered a century of violent maritime disasters and forgotten tragedies, its dark history steeped in tales of sailors lost to the merciless deep. I foolishly took the job as the sole caretaker of the automated maritime beacon during the harshest winter storm season on record, thinking it would be easy money. Just monitor the backup generators and watch the endless crashing waves from a safe distance inside a fortress of reinforced concrete, while collecting a generous paycheck to clear my family's mounting debts. The local villagers had warned me sternly on my very first day never to look out toward the open sea when the midnight bell tolled from the sunken ruins of the old wharf far below. But I had laughed off their desperate superstitions as foolish ghost tales meant merely to scare away curious outsiders. My living quarters were constructed directly beneath the massive glass dome of the light itself, accessible only by a spiraling, claustrophobic iron staircase that echoed hollowly with every single footstep I took in the suffocating gloom. On my fourth night on duty, right as the antique grandfather clock in the corner struck 12 agonizing chimes, the powerful motorized beacon above me abruptly ground to a mechanical halt, plunging the entire tower into absolute suffocating darkness, while a thick, unnatural silence choked the howling winter wind outside. That was when I heard it, The heavy, dragging sound of wet, waterlogged boots slowly ascending the spiral iron staircase, step by agonizing step, coming straight up toward my locked wooden door with a deliberate and terrifying rhythm that made my blood run instantly cold. My heart hammered wildly against my ribs like a trapped bird as I froze in the pitch blackness, gripping my heavy steel flashlight like a weapon, while the slow footsteps finally stopped right outside my wooden threshold, hovering in the oppressive dark. A sudden, freezing draft swept under the gap of the door, carrying the overwhelming and sickening stench of rotting kelp, dead fish, and stagnant ocean floor silt that made my lungs burn for fresh air and instantly triggered my gag reflex. Then came the scratching. A rhythmic, manic scraping of long, jagged fingernails dragging mercilessly across the outer wood panels, followed immediately by a wet, bubbling voice whispering my exact name through the keyhole, begging me with weeping tones to open the door and let the freezing water inside. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my hands tightly over my ears to block out the horrifying chorus of muffled, drowning gasps and agonizing cries echoing from every shadowy corner of the room. Trapped in a waking nightmare that felt like it would stretch on for an eternity of psychological torment. The scratching did not relent for even a second. Instead, it intensified exponentially, multiplying into dozens of frantic, desperate claws tearing viciously at the wooden panels of the door, accompanied by heavy, brutal thuds that rattled the very foundation of the stone room and threatened to shatter the lock entirely. I huddled low in the darkest corner, clutching my knees tightly to my chest, weeping silently as the invisible entities outside began to chant in horrifying unison, their voices shifting rapidly from human speech into a distorted, gargling shriek that vibrated directly inside my skull. Hours stretched into what felt like years of pure, unadulterated terror, every single second bleeding into the next as the freezing cold seeped through the thick walls and frosted the inside of my windows with intricate, jagged patterns that resembled frozen skeletal hands reaching inward. Just when I thought my fragile mind would shatter completely under the crushing weight of the horror, the chaotic symphony outside slowly began to fade away, replaced by a profound, heavy stillness that felt even more ominous and threatening than the deafening noise. The terrifying sounds did not stop until the very first pale, sickly ray of morning sunlight finally broke across the churning horizon, burning away the oppressive fog and leaving behind a ringing vacuum of silence that felt entirely unreal. I didn't waste a single second packing my belongings or securing my gear. I grabbed my keys, bolted down the winding stairs, and sped away from that cursed lighthouse without looking back once, knowing full well with every fiber of my being that whatever crawled out of the dark sea that night is still waiting down there in the depths, keeping score of every second I have left, whispering my name in the dark whenever the tide comes in and the midnight hour approaches, dragging its rotting nails across the forgotten timber of the world below. If you enjoyed this terrifying story, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more dark and suspenseful stories